The air over Tokyo still shimmered with the memory of fire. The war had ended weeks earlier, but the city was a skeleton of itself. Streets turned to grey veins, homes reduced to shadows. Smoke rose from the earth like the last breath of a dying giant. Among the ruins walked Hiroshi Tanaka, a carpenter who had once built temples and houses with his father. Now his hands were calloused from digging instead of crafting, pulling splinters from what was left of his neighborhood. He moved through what had been his street, stepping over bricks and twisted metal until he reached the spot where his house used to stand. There was nothing left but the foundation stones and the smell of burnt tatami. His wife, Aiko, sat on an overturned beam holding their small daughter, Emi, who was tracing circles in the ash with her finger. The wind carried the sound of hammering from somewhere distant. The Americans were rebuilding their barracks. The rhythm of nails hitting wood echoed like ghosts, mocking the silence of the Japanese homes that lay in ruins. Every day since the surrender, Hiroshi had watched them, soldiers in khaki uniforms repairing, painting, and raising walls. He felt something strange watching it, resentment tangled with envy. The enemy was building again while his people picked through rubble. Pride told him not to look, but survival made him stare. That evening he gathered a few surviving neighbors around the remnants of a fire pit. "The roofs are gone, the wells are poisoned, and winter will come," said old Sato, a teacher whose home had burned. "We can't wait for anyone. We must build with what we have." "But what we have is nothing," Hiroshi said quietly. "The bamboo is gone, the nails are gone, even the tools are gone. The Americans took the metal for their machines." Silence fell. The teacher nodded slowly. "Then perhaps we must swallow our pride. Ask?" The word hung like smoke in the air. Ask the enemy. The thought alone felt like betrayal. But the next morning, when Hiroshi saw a group of American soldiers unloading lumber near the airfield, something inside him, part desperation, part courage, pushed him forward. He approached slowly, his hands raised. The soldiers turned, eyes wary. One of them, a tall man with a weathered face, stepped forward. "Can I help you, mister?" he said, his accent thick but kind. Hiroshi pointed to the wood, then to himself, then mimed hammering. "House," he said in halting English. "Children. Cold." The soldier looked at him for a long moment, then called to another man, Sergeant William Carter, his unit's engineer. Carter crouched down, studying Hiroshi's hands. "You're a carpenter?" Hiroshi nodded. "Yes, my father. Also carpenter." Carter looked over his shoulder at the stacks of lumber. "We got extra planks for a supply shed. Maybe—" He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Maybe a few go missing." Hiroshi's breath caught. "You give?" Carter shrugged. "You build for your people. That's peace, ain't it?" That night, Hiroshi returned with a cart and his wife. The Americans helped him load pieces of wood under the dim glow of a lantern. They didn't speak much. War had stolen their words. But in that quiet act, the lifting, the passing, the nodding, something shifted. The weight of years of hatred began to loosen, board by board. The next morning, the village gathered as Hiroshi drove the cart back into the ruins. "The enemy gave you this?" Sato asked. Hiroshi nodded. "The enemy who fights is gone. These men build." They began that day. Hiroshi worked until his hands bled, fashioning walls from broken beams and roofs from salvaged tarps. The others followed his lead, patching together what little dignity the fire hadn't burned away. And every few days, more scraps of lumber would appear. It was near the road, always at night, always from the same direction. Soon the Americans themselves began to visit. They came carrying nails, rope, even tins of paint. For Hiroshi and Aiko, life began to feel almost normal again. Their home filled with laughter, and their daughter learned her first English words. "Thank you." Sometimes Hiroshi would stand outside at dusk, watching the horizon glow orange and gold. He'd see the silhouettes of soldiers walking back to camp, their hammers slung over their shoulders like old rifles. And he would think, maybe peace was not something you waited for. Maybe peace was something you built with your own 2 hands. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to WWII Relics Explained and ring the bell, because sometimes rebuilding is the bravest thing soldiers ever do. By the time winter arrived, the hills of Japan no longer echoed with gunfire, but with the sound of saws and hammers. The village that had once been nothing but charred earth now stood dotted with half-built homes, each one a patchwork of salvaged beams, American planks, and faith. The people called it the Town of Hands, because hands, not nations, had built it. Every morning Hiroshi walked to the edge of the village where the Americans set up a temporary workshop. He carried his tools in a small bamboo basket, worn smooth from use. Sergeant Carter was always there first, sharpening his saw. "Morning, partner," he'd say, grinning. The word partner still sounded strange to Hiroshi's ears, but he liked the way it felt. Equal, simple, human. Aiko would come by midday with food, rice balls, miso soup, and sometimes a few sweet potatoes when she could find them. The soldiers loved her cooking. One of them, Private Davis, called her Mama Aiko, though she was only 28. She laughed when he said it, then packed extra rice for the men working late. For people who had been enemies mere months ago, they now felt more like neighbors. The Americans learned bits of Japanese, the villagers bits of English. "Wood," Hiroshi would say, pointing to a plank. "Ki." "Tree," Carter replied. "Ki?" Hiroshi nodded. "Yes, tree, wood, life." Carter repeated the words slowly. "Life? Ki?" Then he looked out over the valley and said softly, "Feels about right." But not everyone approved. Rumors spread among nearby towns that the Americans were manipulating the villagers, using kindness to erase guilt. Some Japanese soldiers who had returned home in disgrace warned the locals not to trust them. One afternoon, while Hiroshi and Carter worked on a school roof, a stranger appeared at the edge of the site, a gaunt man in a tattered uniform, eyes hard as steel. "You build for the enemy?" he spat in Japanese. "You bow to the ones who burned our cities?" Hiroshi looked down from the scaffold. "I build for my daughter, for our children. You would have them live in ashes?" The man's face twisted. "They took everything, and now you let them pretend to give it back." Carter didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He stepped between them calmly. "Problem?" Hiroshi shook his head. "Old wounds," he said quietly. "They bleed when touched." The man left, muttering curses, and the soldiers kept working. But that night Hiroshi couldn't sleep. The question lingered. Was peace betrayal? He stared at the sleeping forms of Aiko and Emi beside him, and whispered to himself, "If forgiveness is a crime, then let me be guilty forever." Weeks passed, and with them came small miracles. The rebuilt school opened first. On the morning of its dedication, the children gathered under a hand-painted banner that read, "For the Future." The Americans stood at the back, their uniforms clean but their boots muddy. The teacher, old Sato, stepped forward and bowed deeply. "These men who were once our enemies have given us back our classrooms," he said. "May our children learn that peace is built, not declared." After the ceremony, Carter handed Hiroshi a photograph, the first picture ever taken of the new village. "Keep it," he said, "so you remember what we did." Hiroshi looked at the image. Yo, children in front of the school, American soldiers behind them, and in the middle, himself, hammer in hand, smiling. "I will remember," he said softly, "but I will also tell." In early March, an American news photographer named Eleanor Wright arrived to document the reconstruction. She was young, bold, and curious. The soldiers called her Ellie. She spent days following them through the villages, snapping pictures of men working side by side. "It's strange," she said to Carter one afternoon. "You build houses, not headlines." Carter grinned. Guess peace don't make for good copy. She smiled. Maybe it should. Her photographs would later appear in Life magazine under the headline, Enemies No More. One picture, a small girl handing a flower to an American soldier, would go viral across the world. In the photo, Emmy stood barefoot on the newly rebuilt road, offering a daisy to Carter. His hand was extended, rough and gentle all at once. The caption read, "A flower for peace." The photo reached Washington, and for a brief moment it became the symbol of a new Japan. Donations poured in. The military approved more supplies for rebuilding. Civilians began volunteering to help American engineers. A few veterans wrote letters saying they'd changed their minds about the enemy. Some said they cried when they saw it. Months turned into a year. By 1946, the little village had grown into a small community. There were 20 new homes, a school, a well, and a small clinic. The villagers began calling it Tanaka Mura after Hiroshi, though he protested, laughing. "I only hammered nails," he said. "Maybe," said Sato, "but you also hammered hearts." The Americans prepared to leave that summer. On their last evening, the village gathered to say goodbye. Lanterns hung from poles, casting pools of golden light across the square. Aiko cooked rice balls and soup for everyone. The children ran between the tables laughing, their bellies full, their fears forgotten. Carter stood beside Hiroshi, both men watching the fireflies rise over the fields. "You'll keep building, right?" Carter asked. Hiroshi nodded. "As long as my hands remember how." Carter extended his hand. "Then I reckon that's all that matters." They shook, firm, wordless, eternal. Two carpenters, two fathers, two men who had laid down weapons to pick up hammers. Iko approached, holding a small package wrapped in cloth. She handed it to Carter. "For you," she said in careful English. Inside was a tiny wooden carving, a bird, wings outstretched. "Freedom," she said. Carter looked down at it, eyes glistening. "Beautiful," he whispered. "I'll keep it always." The soldiers boarded their trucks the next morning. The villagers stood waving as engines rumbled to life. Emma ran after them, waving her handkerchief, her voice high and clear. "Goodbye! Come again!" Carter leaned out the window, waving back. "Someday, kiddo, someday!" As the convoy disappeared over the hill, Hiroshi stood quietly. He looked around at the homes, the school, the garden blooming by the well. For the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Pride. Not the pride of empire, or victory, or flag, but the pride of creation. 10 years later, in 1955, the photo of Emmy and Carter resurfaced in a Tokyo Museum exhibit titled The Reconstruction Years. Beneath it was a quote from an unknown villager. "The Americans gave us wood, but we built the walls ourselves, and inside those walls, peace grew." Emmy, now a teenager, stood in front of the photograph beside her father. She smiled. "I remember him," she said. "He gave me chocolate." Hiroshi chuckled. "And nails. Don't forget the nails." She looked up at him. "Do you think he remembers us?" Hiroshi gazed at the picture, the little girl, the soldier, the flower between them. "If he was the kind of man I think he was," he said, "he never forgot." And somewhere across the ocean in Kansas, an aging Sergeant William Carter sat in his workshop, the little wooden bird perched on a shelf above his bench. Every time the wind rattled the window, it seemed to move its wings. He would look up from his work, smile, and whisper, "Still flying." Because some gifts and some friendships never fall. Summer of 1964. Japan had changed. Concrete towers rose where wooden houses once stood, and trains glided over rails that hummed like veins, carrying the pulse of a reborn nation. But in the small coastal town once known as Tanakamura, the rhythm was the same. Hammer on wood, waves on shore, children laughing in the rebuilt school. The war was a distant echo now, but the stories, like old beams, still held the roof up. Hiroshi Tanaka, now in his 50s, sat outside his workshop repairing a fisherman's oar. His hands were slower but still strong, shaped by 30 years of building peace plank by plank. On the wall above his bench hung the photograph that had travelled around the world, little Emmy offering a daisy to Sergeant Carter. The edges were yellowed, but the feeling inside it had never aged. He heard footsteps on the path. When he looked up, a young woman stood there holding a letter. She wore a khaki jacket and spoke hesitant Japanese. "Are you Hiroshi Tanaka?" He nodded. "Yes." She smiled. "My name is Sarah Carter. I'm the daughter of Sergeant William Carter." Hiroshi's breath caught. "Carter, your father built with me. He placed a trembling hand on the photograph. "He was my friend." She nodded softly. "I know. He told me about you, about the village. He called you the best carpenter he ever met." Hiroshi laughed, eyes watering. "He lied kindly." She handed him the letter. "He passed away last winter, but before he did, he made me promise to bring you this." Hiroshi took the envelope gently. The paper is worn, the handwriting careful but shaky. He opened it slowly, afraid to breathe. "Dear Hiroshi, if you're reading this, my daughter's found her way to you. I've kept that little wooden bird you carved for me all my life. It sits above my workbench. Every time I see it, I remember the sound of your hammer and the smell of sawdust and rice soup. I used to think the army taught me about duty, but you taught me about peace. You showed me that building something with someone you were told to hate is harder and braver than fighting them. If you ever doubt what we did mattered, look around you. If children laugh, if homes stand, if hearts are softer, then it mattered. With gratitude, your friend always, Bill Carter." Hiroshi folded the letter carefully and pressed it to his chest. "He remembered," he whispered. "All this time." Sarah smiled. "He did more than remember. He told his students. He became a teacher after the war. He used your story to teach about forgiveness." Hiroshi exhaled slowly. "Then he kept building too." That evening, the town gathered to meet her. Word had spread. The daughter of the American builder has come. Lanterns were lit, and people brought gifts of food and laughter. Sarah was overwhelmed. "It's like stepping into one of his stories," she said. The villagers showed her the school, the well, the garden by the old riverbank, all the things her father had helped build. Aiko, grey-haired now but still smiling, took Sarah's hand and said, "He was good man, you same." Emmy, now a grown woman, brought out an old photo album. "My father kept everything," she said, flipping through the pages, the rebuilding, the children, the Americans working shoulder to shoulder with the villagers. At the last page was a photo of Carter sitting on the roof beam, smiling down at the camera. Beneath it, in faded ink, Hiroshi had written, "He built not just houses, he built peace." Sarah traced the writing with her fingertip. "He said the same thing about you." Later that night, they all gathered near the water. Hiroshi lit a small lantern and placed it on the river. "For your father," he said softly. Sarah added another beside it. "For yours." The two lights drifted downstream together, side by side, until they disappeared into the dark. Two souls still building bridges even after death. In the following weeks, Sarah stayed in Tanakamura, helping the villagers repair a community center roof damaged by storms. "I'm not much of a carpenter," she laughed, fumbling with a hammer. Hiroshi smiled. "No one is at first. But peace needs practice." By the end of the summer, she had learned enough to build a small wooden bench overlooking the river. On its back, she carved in both English and Japanese, "Hands that build never make war." When she left, she gave Hiroshi a photograph of her father's workshop, the little wooden bird still perched above the bench. "He said it always reminded him of home," she said. "Maybe it belonged here all along." Hiroshi took the picture and nodded. "Then I will keep it where it began." Years passed. The children of Tanakamura grew up, married, and built new homes. The old huts became museums, the garden became a park. On the anniversary of the rebuilding, the townspeople gathered every year to honor the Americans who had helped them. They called it the Festival of Hands. In 1985, a television crew from WWII led to film a documentary about post-war friendship. They found Hiroshi sitting by the same riverbank, watching the sunset. When the reporter asked him, "What do you remember most about the Americans?" he didn't hesitate. "The sound," he said. "The sound?" "Yes, the sound of hammers. It was the heartbeat of peace." The camera lingered on his weathered hands, still strong despite age. "Do you think people can ever truly forgive?" the reporter asked. Hiroshi looked toward the horizon where the sky burned gold. "Forgiveness," he said, "is not a word. It is a wall we rebuild together. And if you build long enough, one day, you forget it was ever broken." When Hiroshi passed away in 1992, the entire village gathered. Children carried flowers, elders carried his old tools, and on his coffin, Aiko placed the photograph of him and Carter. The priest recited the Sutra for Peace, and as the smoke rose, it seemed to carry the rhythm of hammering, steady, strong, eternal. Years later, the village erected a wooden archway at the town's entrance. At its top, carved deep into the beam, were the words, "Built by enemies, preserved by friends." Beneath it hung two flags, the Japanese and the American, tied together with a single strand of rope. Not perfect, not polished, but strong. Today, Tanakamura still stands, though most maps call it by another name. Tourists come to see the old carpentry school that Hiroshi founded, now a museum. Inside, on the main wall, a single artifact rests under glass, a small wooden bird, wings open wide. The plaque reads, "Carved by a Japanese carpenter for an American soldier. It flew farther than either could imagine." Every spring, children from the local school place daisies beside it, a tradition begun by Emmy's grandchildren. Visitors pause and smile at the photo nearby, the little girl and the soldier, the daisy between them. Some stand, in silence. Others whisper. But every single one leaves with the same thought, that perhaps the truest victory of war is found not in surrender, but in rebuilding. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of that museum, if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear it still, the sound of two men working side by side, rebuilding the world, one nail at a time.